Captain Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant and watched the enemy ships come closer through the dark space around. Kepler 442b, 300 alien warships moved like deadly metal sharks toward the small, human fleet that defended the planet below. Jake counted his own ships again and felt his heart sink deeper with each number. 12 ships against 300. The math was simple and cruel. The planet held 2 million people who could not escape in time. Farm families who had spent their whole lives growing food for the colonies. Children who played in fields of golden wheat under an alien sun. Old people who remembered Earth but called this world home. All of them looked up at the sky and trusted that someone would keep them safe. The Zirathi Empire had been crushing human worlds for 3 years now. Their ships were faster and stronger than anything humans could build. Their weapons could cut through human armor like paper. Their commanders never showed mercy to anyone who stood against them. World after world had fallen to their gray ships. And Cold Hearts. Admiral Greg Foster spoke through the radio from his flagship. His voice sounded tired and old. All ships prepare to retreat. We cannot win this fight. We must save what we can. Jake felt his hands shake as he gripped the captain's chair. Around him his crew worked at their stations, but he could see the fear in their eyes. His weapons officer was a young woman named Kate who had joined the fleet to see the stars. His pilot was an old man called Pete who had 3 grandchildren. On the planet below, his engineer was Danny Roberts, who fixed everything that broke and never complained about the long hours. Captain Sullivan, do you copy the retreat order? Admiral Foster asked again. Jake looked at the screen that showed the planet. He could see the lights of cities and towns spread across the green and brown land masses. Somewhere down there a little girl was probably asking her mother why the sky was full of strange lights. Somewhere a farmer was looking up and wondering if he would live to see another harvest. War Commander Thekver led the Zirathi fleet in his massive black ship. Jake had read the reports about this alien commander. Thekver had destroyed 16 human colonies without losing a single ship. He never accepted surrender. He never spared civilians. He turned living worlds into empty rocks floating in space. The first human ship to die was the UES Ranger, commanded by Captain Lisa Park. She was a brave woman who had saved a whole colony ship from pirates 2 years ago. Jake watched her ship charge straight at 2 Zirathi cruisers. She rammed them both, and all 3 ships exploded in a ball of white fire. Lisa died, but she took 40 enemy soldiers with her. One by one, the other human ships fell back or got destroyed. Captain Bob Turner in the UES Guardian fought until his engines failed and then kept shooting until the Zirathi cut his ship in half. Commander Sally Morgan tried to protect the UES Liberty, but both ships got surrounded and blown apart by laser fire that lit up space like lightning. Admiral Foster's ship took heavy damage and started falling back toward the edge of the system. Only 3 human ships were left fighting. Then 2, then just the UES Defiant alone against the entire enemy fleet. Jake made his choice. He walked to the engine room where Danny Roberts was trying to keep the fusion core from exploding. Danny, I need you to remove all the safety controls from the reactor. Danny looked at him with wide eyes. Captain, that will make the whole ship into a bomb, I know. Jake returned to the bridge and told his crew his plan. Some of them wanted to escape in the small shuttle pods. Others wanted to stay and fight until the end. Kate, the weapons officer, said she would rather die as a human than live as a slave. Pete, the pilot, said his grandchildren would understand why he stayed. Danny Roberts came back from the engine room and said the reactor was ready. The Zirathi ships surrounded the Defiant, but they did not fire yet. War Commander Thekver wanted to capture the last human ship and study their technology. Jake could see the alien commander's flagship getting closer. Jake spoke to his crew one last time. Today we show the galaxy what humans are made of. Today, we prove that some things are worth dying for. He pointed his ship straight at the enemy flagship and pushed the engines to full power. The Defiant shot forward like an arrow toward the heart of the Zirathi fleet. Thekver realized what was happening and ordered his ships to fire, but it was too late. Jake's ship hit the flagship, and both vessels exploded in a blast of light that could be seen from the planet's surface. The explosion was so big that it destroyed 20 more Zirathi ships and damaged 50 others. Half of the enemy fleet was gone in one moment of human courage. The remaining Zirathi ships retreated from the system, but the planet was still lost. The aliens would come back with more ships and finish what they started. But something had changed in that moment when Jake Sullivan chose to die for strangers. Across the galaxy, people watched the recordings of his sacrifice and wondered what kind of species would do such a thing. The Zirathi had won the battle, but they had learned something new about humans. They had learned that humans would rather die than abandon those who needed protection. This knowledge would spread through the galaxy like fire and change everything that came after. 3 months after the battle at Kepler 442b, something strange began happening across the galaxy. Ambassador Claire Morrison walked through the halls of Nexus Station and noticed that alien species who had never talked to humans before were asking questions about Earth and its people. The great space station orbited a neutral star and served as home to the Galactic Council, where all the major species met to discuss trade and politics. Claire had been Earth's representative for 5 years and had grown used to empty meeting rooms and ignored requests for help. Most alien species saw humans as weak newcomers who would soon be conquered by the Zirathi Empire. But today her office was full of visitors from worlds she had never heard of. A tall, blue-skinned delegate from the Altair Republic sat across from her desk. His name was difficult for humans to say, so he called himself Blue when talking to Earth. People, Ambassador Morrison, we have heard stories about your Captain Sullivan and his sacrifice at Kepler. Is it true that he chose to die to protect people he did not know? Claire nodded and felt sadness fill her chest, as it always did when she thought about Jake. Yes, it is true. Captain Sullivan could have escaped, but he stayed to fight for the colonists on the planet. Blue leaned forward with interest burning in his large yellow eyes. Our people have been fighting the Zirathi for 10 years. We have lost many battles and many worlds. But we have never seen one of their commanders sacrifice himself to save civilians. Your Captain Sullivan did something that none of us understood was possible. More aliens came to ask similar questions. The Kithara were insect-like creatures who lived in the Outer Rim and had stayed neutral in all wars for 1,000 years. Their representative was a female called Speaker Zix, who made clicking sounds when she talked. We have studied the battle recordings many times. Captain Sullivan had clear opportunities to retreat and save his own life. Why did he choose death instead? Dr. Alex Bennett was a human scientist who studied alien minds and cultures. He had been working on Nexus Station for 2 years trying to understand how different species thought about war and peace. Alex came to Claire's office with a thick folder of research papers and a confused expression on his face. Claire, something incredible is happening. I have been monitoring Zirathi military communications, and they are going crazy trying to understand Jake's actions. They keep calling it the Sullivan anomaly. Their whole military doctrine is based on the idea that inferior species only fight when they have no choice. They believe that all creatures are fundamentally selfish and will always choose survival over sacrifice. Alex spread out charts and graphs on Claire's desk. Look at this data. Zirathi battle plans always assume that enemy forces will retreat when faced with certain death. They use fear and overwhelming force to break enemy morale quickly. But Jake's sacrifice does not fit their understanding of how wars work. They are having to rewrite their tactical manuals. On-Earth President Angela Davis was dealing with her own problems. The planet's population was scared and angry after losing so many colonies to the Zirathi. Many people wanted to build bigger weapons and train more soldiers. Others wanted to surrender and hope for mercy that would never come. Angela knew that humanity could not win a direct war against the Zirathi Empire, but she also knew they could not give up. Angela called a meeting with her top advisors in the White House Situation Room. General Frank Hayes commanded what was left of Earth's military forces. Director Linda Gray ran the intelligence services that tried to keep track of enemy movements. Dr. Sarah Walsh was the president's science advisor who helped make decisions. about new technology and research programs. We cannot build enough ships to match the Zirathi, General Hayes said with frustration in his voice. They have controlled 3 galaxies for 500 years. Their industrial capacity is beyond anything we can imagine. For every ship we build, they can build 100? Director Gray nodded in agreement. Our spy networks are reporting that the Zirathi are planning to attack Earth itself within 6 months. They want to end this war quickly before other species start getting ideas about resistance. President Davis looked out the window at the city of Washington where people were going about their daily lives. Children played in parks while their parents worked and worried about the future. Then we cannot fight them the way they expect. U.S. to fight, Dr. Walsh tell me about Project Beacon. Dr. Walsh opened a tablet computer and showed them her plans. Project Beacon is based on what happened at Kepler 442. Instead of trying to build better weapons, we focus on changing how the galaxy sees humanity. We send volunteers to help refugees and disaster victims on neutral worlds. We provide medical aid and food to anyone who needs it. We show the galaxy that humans care about more than just winning wars. General Hayes shook his head. With respect, Madame President, that sounds like a way to get our people killed for no military advantage. Actually, General, it might be our only military advantage, President Davis replied. Jake Sullivan did not destroy the Zirathi fleet with better weapons or superior tactics. He destroyed half their ships by doing something they did not expect, something they could not understand or plan for. He showed them that humans fight for different reasons than other species. Meanwhile, in a secret prison on the planet Terminus 7, something else was happening that would change everything. Jake Sullivan was not dead as everyone believed. The explosion that destroyed his ship had thrown him into space where a Zirathi rescue pod had picked him up. The aliens wanted to study the human, who had done the impossible thing. The prison was a dark place where the Zirathi kept important prisoners from many different species. Jake shared a cell with Captain Mary Collins, who had been captured 6 months earlier when her ship was attacked near the border. Mary was a tough woman who had served in the Earth Navy for 15 years and refused to break under interrogation. They keep asking me the same questions over and over, Mary told Jake as they sat in their small cell. They want to know how humans think and why we make the choices we make. I think they are scared of something they do not understand. Veltar was the Zirathi intelligence chief who came to question Jake every day. He was a tall gray alien with black eyes and no emotions that humans could recognize. But Jake noticed that Veltar asked different questions than the other interrogators. He seemed genuinely curious about human nature rather than just looking for military information. You chose to die for strangers, Veltar said during one of their sessions. Your species calls this heroic, but we call it illogical. Dead heroes cannot protect anyone. Living soldiers can fight again another day. Jake looked at the alien officer and tried to explain something that felt obvious to him. Some things are more important than staying alive. If I had run away, those 2 million people would have died, and I would have spent the rest of my life knowing I could have saved them. Veltar made notes on his electronic tablet. But you did not save them. The planet fell anyway. Your sacrifice accomplished nothing except your own death. I am not dead, Jake pointed out. You should be dead. The odds of surviving that explosion were less than 1%. Jake smiled for the first time in months. Maybe someone wanted me to live so I could have this conversation with you. Commander Danny Roberts had served as Jake Sullivan's second officer on the UES Defiant and was one of the few people who escaped the battle at Kepler 442b. When he learned that Jake might still be alive in a Zirathi prison, Danny felt hope return to his heart for the first time in months. He also felt something else burning inside him that he had never experienced before. He felt the need to do something that mattered. Danny gathered other survivors from the human fleet and began planning. Something that everyone said was impossible? He wanted to rescue Jake and the other prisoners from Terminus 7, which was the most heavily defended prison planet in Zirathi space. The fortress world was surrounded by automated defense stations and patrolled by 3 full battle fleets. No one had ever escaped from Terminus 7 in the 500 years since it was built, but Danny was not working alone. Word of Jake's sacrifice had spread to species across the galaxy, and many of them were starting to question whether the Zirathi Empire was as strong as it claimed to be. The insect-like Cathara had decided to break their 1,000-year neutrality and offer help to anyone fighting against Zirathi aggression. The blue-skinned Altair Republic secretly provided ships and supplies to resistance groups on conquered worlds. The rescue mission that Danny planned became known as Operation Silent, tied because it relied on stealth and surprise rather than force. A Cathara infiltration specialist named Clickbuzz helped Danny's team get past the prison's outer defenses using technology that could make their ships invisible to Zirathi sensors. 3 Altair volunteers piloted fast courier vessels that could outrun enemy interceptors. Even some Zirathi soldiers who had grown tired of their empire's brutality provided intelligence about prison security. Jake had been organizing the prisoners inside Terminus 7 ever since his arrival. Captain Mary Collins helped him set up communication networks between different cell blocks using a code system based on tapping sounds that the guards could not understand. The prison held thousands of beings from dozens of species who had been captured during various wars and conflicts. Most of them had given up hope of ever seeing freedom again. "We need to be ready when help arrives," Jake told the other prisoners during a secret meeting in the exercise yard. "They will not be able to hold the prison for long, so we have to move fast when the doors open." A Cathara warrior named Bladesong clicked her approval. She had been captured during a border raid and had spent 2 years planning revenge against her captors. "The humans think differently than the rest of us. They see opportunity where we see only death." An old Altair scientist called Blue Sky had been imprisoned for refusing to build weapons for the Zirathi. He had watched Jake during the months since his arrival and noticed something special about the human captain. Jake Sullivan does not just plan escapes, he plans hope. He makes us believe that tomorrow can be better than today. War Commander Thekver had been promoted to Supreme War Commander after his victory at Kepler 442b, but the promotion felt hollow to him. High Command had ordered him to begin Operation Cleansing Storm, which would systematically destroy every world that had provided aid to human refugees. Thekver was a professional soldier who followed orders without question, but something about the new campaign troubled him. The operation began with attacks on 3 neutral worlds that had allowed human medical teams to treat war refugees. The planets had no military defenses and offered no resistance, but Thekver's orders were clear. He was to kill every civilian and leave the worlds uninhabitable as an example to others who might consider helping humans. The first world was called Haven's Rest, and it was home to a peaceful farming community that had welcomed refugees from many different species. When the Zirathi fleet arrived, they found human doctors working in refugee camps and human engineers helping to build shelters for displaced families. The humans could have escaped on the last transport ships, but they chose to stay and help evacuate alien civilians. Thekver watched through his ship's cameras as human volunteers carried alien children to safety while laser fire rained down around them. He saw a human nurse named Betty, who refused to leave a Cathara mother giving birth even when the building around them started to collapse. He saw a human engineer called Steve who stayed behind to operate the planetary shield generators until every refugee ship had escaped. The Supreme War Commander had destroyed many worlds, but he had never seen the enemy choose to protect his people rather than fight for their own lives. The footage from Haven's Rest was broadcast across the galaxy by hidden cameras and underground networks. Billions of beings watched humans die to save aliens and began to ask questions about what kind of war their leaders were really fighting. Danny Roberts and his rescue team reached Terminus the 7th just as news of the Haven's Rest massacre was spreading through the prison. The guards were distracted by reports of riots breaking out on Zirathi worlds where civilians were protesting the murder of innocent refugees. The defense fleet had been called away to deal with uprisings on 3 different planets. The Silent Tide Strike Force consisted of 12 ships carrying 300 volunteers from 8 different species. They hit the prison during a shift change when security was at its weakest. Kithara commandos disabled the automated weapons while Altair hackers took control of the electronic locks. Human Marines fought through the cell blocks looking for Jake and the other important prisoners. Jake was in the middle of his daily interrogation session with Veltar when alarms started going off throughout the facility. The Zirathi intelligence chief looked confused and worried as reports came in about explosions and security breaches. Jake smiled and said quietly, "I told you someone wanted me to live for a reason." The rescue took only 40 minutes, but it freed over 3,000 prisoners who had been held captive for years. Jake reunited with Danny Roberts and learned about everything that had happened since his supposed death. He also met Captain Mary Collins, who had become a leader among the prisoners and had organized resistance cells in dozens of different cell blocks. As the rescue ships prepared to leave Terminus 7, Jake made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of fleeing immediately, he used the prison's communication system to broadcast a message to every Zirathi ship in the sector. He spoke directly to War Commander Thekvar and challenged him to think about what kind of empire he was really serving. "Commander Thekvar, I know you are a soldier who follows orders, but I also know you saw what happened at Haven's Rest. I know you watched humans die to protect your people, and I know that bothered you. You are not a monster even if your leaders are. You have a choice to make about what kind of future you want to build." The message was intercepted and recorded by intelligence services across the galaxy. Jake Sullivan, the man who had died to save strangers, was speaking from beyond the grave to challenge the conscience of his greatest enemy. The broadcast ended with Jake saying something that would be remembered forever. "The strongest weapon in the universe is not a gun or a bomb. It is the courage to do what is right even when doing what is right might kill you." The rescue fleet escaped from Terminus 7, but the real victory was not the prisoners they freed. The real victory was the message they sent to every being in the galaxy. Humans would risk everything to save anyone who needed help. They would fight not to conquer, but to protect. They would die not for glory, but for love. The galaxy was changing in ways that no one had expected when Jake Sullivan first chose to sacrifice himself at Kepler 442b. Supreme General Korthax sat in his command chamber on the Zirathi homeworld and studied reports that made no sense. To him, entire star systems were refusing to follow Empire orders. Zirathi military units were experiencing mass desertions. Some battle fleets had stopped responding to communications altogether. The worst news came from Commander Zephyra, who led the Zirathi 3rd Battle Fleet. She was young for a fleet commander and had earned her position through brilliant tactical victories against rebel worlds. But her latest report contained words that Korthax had never expected to hear from one of his most trusted officers. "General, we intercepted the human broadcast from Terminus 7, and I must report that it has had a severe impact on fleet morale. Many of our soldiers are questioning the necessity of Operation Cleansing Storm. They have seen the footage from Haven's Rest, and they are asking why we killed beings who were only trying to help refugees." Korthax felt anger rise in his chest. Like fire, "Commander Zephyra, your soldiers are not paid to think about politics. They are paid to follow orders and destroy enemies of the Empire." "Yes, sir, but they are also asking what makes someone an enemy. The humans at Haven's Rest were not armed. They were not attacking our forces. They were carrying alien children to safety when our bombardment began. Some of my soldiers are saying that we are the ones who look like monsters." Dr. Elena Rodriguez was Earth's leading expert on alien politics and psychology. She had been studying the Zirathi Empire for 10 years and had developed what she called the Mirror Protocol. Instead of fighting the Zirathi using their own methods, humans would do the exact opposite of everything the Empire stood for. Where Zirathi spread fear, humans would spread hope. Where Zirathi demanded obedience, humans would offer friendship. Elena presented her plan to President Angela Davis during an emergency meeting at the White House. "Madam President, we cannot win a military war against the Zirathi, but we might be able to win a moral war. Every time they commit an atrocity, we respond with an act of kindness. Every time they destroy something, we build something better. Every time they show hatred, we show love." President Davis looked tired from months of crisis management, but Elena's words gave her new energy. Dr. Rodriguez, your plan sounds wonderful, but how do we implement it when our own people are angry and scared? How do we convince humans to help aliens when aliens are trying to kill us? We follow Jake Sullivan's example. We show the galaxy that humans care more about doing what is right than about staying safe. We prove that our strength comes not from our weapons, but from our willingness to use those weapons to protect others rather than conquer them. Jake Sullivan had returned to Earth as a hero, but he did not feel like celebrating. The rescue from Terminus the Seventh had been successful, but the war was far from over. Jake met with President Davis and her advisors to discuss strategy for the battles ahead. He had learned things during his imprisonment that could help humanity survive, but the knowledge came with a terrible price. Madam President, the Zirathi are planning to attack Earth directly within 3 months. Veltar told me this during one of our conversations. He was trying to break my spirit by letting me know that everyone I cared about would soon be dead. But I think he was also warning me because part of him wants us to be ready. General Frank Hayes slammed his fist on the conference table. Captain Sullivan, with respect, we cannot trust anything a Zirathi officer tells you. This could be disinformation designed to make us waste resources on unnecessary defenses. Jake shook his head slowly. General, I spent months talking to Veltar every day. I watched him struggle with questions he had never been forced to ask before. He is still loyal to the Empire, but he is no longer certain that the Empire is right. The Sullivan anomaly, as they call it, has infected their entire command structure with doubt. Dr. Elena Rodriguez leaned forward with excitement in her eyes. Jake, this is exactly what the Mirror Protocol is designed to achieve. We are not trying to destroy the Zirathi Empire through military force. We are trying to transform it through moral example. Every act of kindness creates cracks in their certainty. Every sacrifice for others makes them question their own values. Jake was given command of a new fleet built from ships donated by species across the galaxy. The vessel he chose as his flagship was called the UES Redemption, and it carried crews from 12 different worlds. His second-in-command was Danny Roberts, who had proven himself during the Terminus 7 rescue. His tactical officer was Captain Mary Collins, who had learned Zirathi strategy during her months in prison. The first test of Jake's new fleet came at the siege of Gamma Centauri, where Zirathi forces were preparing to destroy a major trade hub that had provided supplies to human relief efforts. The planet held 50 million civilians from dozens of species who could not be evacuated in time. Jake arrived with 30 ships to face a Zirathi battle group of over 100 vessels. Instead of attacking immediately, Jake did something that confused everyone, including his own officers. He sent a message to the Zirathi commander offering to discuss terms for the planet's surrender. But when the enemy fleet surrounded his ships, Jake revealed his true plan. He began broadcasting on all frequencies as his vessels systematically positioned themselves between the Zirathi guns and the evacuation ships leaving the planet. This is Captain Jake Sullivan of the Earth Space Navy speaking to all beings who can hear this transmission. Today my fleet will demonstrate what humans fight for and why we cannot be defeated. We do not fight to conquer worlds or enslave peoples. We fight to protect the innocent and defend the helpless. Watch what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable conscience. Jake's ships began taking heavy damage as they shielded the civilian transports, but none of them broke formation or returned fire. The crew of the Redemption watched their shields fail and their armor crack, but they held their position until every refugee ship had reached safe distance. Only then did Jake give the order to retreat, and by then half his fleet was gone. The broadcast reached billions of beings across the galaxy, including Zirathi homeworlds where civilians had never seen footage of actual combat. They watched human ships die to protect alien refugees and began to understand what Commander Zephyra meant when she talked about moral confusion among the troops. They saw their own soldiers destroying vessels that were clearly trying to save lives rather than take them. Veltar was no longer just questioning his empire's methods. He had begun secretly providing information to human intelligence networks about Zirathi fleet movements and strategic plans. The conversations with Jake had planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger every day. When he learned about the battle at Gamma Centauri, Veltar made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. He contacted Danny Roberts through encrypted channels and offered to provide detailed information about the planned attack on Earth. The intelligence was so valuable that human forces would be able to prepare defenses that could actually stop the invasion. But Veltar wanted something in return that surprised everyone who heard his request. Commander Roberts, I will give you everything you need to protect your homeworld, but I want you to promise me something. When this war ends, I want Jake Sullivan to speak to the Zirithi people the way he spoke to me during those interrogation sessions. I want him to help us find a way to be better than what we have become. The information Veltar provided revealed that the Zirithi were planning to use their entire strategic reserve for the Earth assault. Every available ship would be committed to ending the human threat once and for all. But the intelligence also revealed something else that gave Jake hope for the first time since the war began. Large numbers of Zirithi officers were having second thoughts about the campaign, and some entire units were refusing to participate in operations against civilian targets. The Mirror Protocol was working better than anyone had dared to hope. Human sacrifice and kindness were creating fractures in the Zirithi war machine that no weapon could have achieved. Jake Sullivan had started something at Kepler 442b that was spreading through the galaxy like wildfire and changing the nature of war itself. General Patricia Hayes had taken command of what everyone now called the Liberation Alliance after her brother, Frank, was killed defending a refugee convoy near the Outer Rim. She stood in the command center on Luna Base and looked at a holographic map that showed the largest military operation in galactic history. 300 star systems had declared independence from the Zirithi Empire and were coordinating simultaneous uprisings across half the known galaxy. The Alliance fleet consisted of ships from 47 different species, but they all followed human leadership, not because humans had the best weapons or the strongest ships, but because humans had proven they would use their strength to protect rather than conquer. Patricia had never imagined when she joined Earth's military 20 years ago that she would command aliens who trusted her more than they trusted their own governments. Jake Sullivan stood beside her, studying the tactical displays and planning the final operation that would either free the galaxy or destroy everything they had worked to build. The plan was so audacious that most military experts said it was impossible, but Jake had learned that impossible things became possible when people were willing to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. General Hayes, we have confirmation that Commander Zephyra has taken control of the Zirithi Third Fleet and declared for the Liberation Alliance. That gives us nearly 200 additional ships, but more importantly, it proves that the enemy empire is falling apart from within. Patricia nodded and felt hope mix with fear in her chest. Captain Sullivan, your plan to attack Zirithi Prime directly still sounds like suicide to me. Even with Zephyra's fleet, we will be outnumbered 10-1 when we reach their home system. Jake smiled and pointed to reports coming in from intelligence networks across the galaxy. General, the numbers do not tell the whole story. Look at these desertion rates. Look at these refusal to obey orders. Look at these reports of Zirithi soldiers helping evacuate civilians from planets their own empire is attacking. We are not fighting the same enemy that destroyed Kepler 442b 3 years ago. The final assault began with Jake's personal message broadcast to every world in Zirithi space. He spoke directly to the soldiers and civilians of the Empire and offered them something their leaders had never given them. He offered them a choice between fear and hope. People of the Zirithi Empire, my name is Jake Sullivan, and 3 years ago your leaders tried to kill me for defending innocent civilians. Today I return to your space not as a conqueror but as a friend. I come to offer you the same thing I offered your intelligence chief Veltar during my imprisonment. I offer you the chance to choose what kind of future you want to build. Jake's fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zirithi home system and found something no one had expected. Half of the defense fleet was gone and the remaining ships were positioned in a defensive formation that looked more like a protective shield than an attack force. Commander Zephra voice came through the communication system with news that changed everything. Captain Sullivan, this is Commander Zephra speaking for the Zirathi Defense Coalition. We have taken control of the home system and arrested Supreme General Korthax on charges of war crimes against civilian populations. We request permission to negotiate terms for ending this conflict peacefully. But Jake's response surprised everyone, including his own officers. Commander Zephra, I appreciate your efforts, but I did not come here to negotiate with military leaders who seized power through force. I came here to speak to the people of your empire and let them decide for themselves what kind of government they want. The Liberation Alliance fleet moved into orbit around Zirathi Prime, but instead of attacking the planet, Jake requested permission to land and address the planetary assembly. The request was so unprecedented that the remaining government officials did not know how to respond. No enemy commander in Zirathi history had ever asked to speak to civilians rather than fight soldiers. Jake's speech to the Zirathi people became known as the Prometheus Declaration because he brought them the fire of hope that their leaders had tried to extinguish. He stood before millions of beings in the great assembly hall and spoke words that had never been heard on their world before. Citizens of Zirathi Prime, I did not come here to destroy your empire or enslave your people. I came here to save you from leaders who have forgotten that the purpose of government is to protect citizens, not to conquer neighbors. You are not my enemies. You are victims of the same fear and hatred that has poisoned this galaxy for too long. Jake presented evidence of Zirathi cultural achievements from before their imperial expansion period. He showed them art and literature and music created by their ancestors who had valued beauty and wisdom over conquest and domination. He reminded them of who they used to be before fear turned them into something they were never meant to become. Your empire conquered 3 galaxies, but what did that conquest give you except more enemies and more wars? Your soldiers die on distant worlds fighting people who never threatened your homes. Your children grow up learning to hate strangers they have never met. Your leaders tell you that strength comes from making others fear you, but I tell you that real strength comes from making others trust you. Supreme General Korthax made one final desperate attempt to save his dying empire. From his prison cell, he activated a secret weapon that had been hidden on the dark side of Zirathi Prime's largest moon. The weapon was designed to destroy entire star systems, and he aimed it at Earth with the intention of killing every human in the galaxy, even if it meant destroying his own people in the process. But the weapon never fired because Commander Zephra had anticipated this possibility. Her ships intercepted the weapon system and disabled it before it could charge its main guns. More importantly, the attempt to use a planet-killing weapon against civilian targets finally convinced the last Zirathi loyalists that their empire had become something evil that needed to end. Veltar emerged from hiding where he had been coordinating resistance activities and presented himself to Jake as a representative of Zirathi citizens who wanted to build a new government based on protection rather than domination. The former intelligence chief had spent months studying human philosophy and political theory and had developed plans for transforming the empire into something resembling Earth's democratic system. Jake Sullivan, you once told me that someone has to be willing to stand up first, and that once you stand up you discover you are not standing alone. Today, the Zirathi people are ready to stand up and join you in building a galaxy where strength is measured by how many people you protect rather than how many people you conquer. The transformation was not immediate or easy, but it was real. Worlds that had been enemies for centuries began working together to rebuild what the wars had destroyed. Species that had never trusted each other started sharing technology and knowledge for peaceful purposes. Children from dozens of different worlds played together in schools that taught cooperation instead of competition. Jake Sullivan had proven that one person willing to sacrifice everything for others could change the entire galaxy. But more importantly, he had proven that the change would last because it was based on love rather than fear. The warrior who made humanity unstoppable had done so not by perfecting the art of war, but by perfecting the art of hope. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Kepler 442b, and Jake Sullivan stood in a garden on the rebuilt world. watching children from a dozen different species play together under the alien sun. The planet that had once been a battlefield was now a symbol of hope for the entire galaxy. Memorial gardens honored all the beings who had died in the wars, while new cities rose from the ashes of the old conflicts. Jake carried the honorary title Guardian of the Galaxy, but he insisted that everyone just call him Jake. He lived in a simple house with his wife, Susan, who had been a resistance fighter during the liberation of Terminus 7. They had met during the chaos of those desperate days and discovered that love could grow even in the darkest times. Their home was always full of visitors from across the galaxy who came to learn about the human way of building peace. The Galactic Accord had been signed in the same field where Jake's ship had exploded 3 years earlier. Representatives from over 200 worlds had gathered to create a new government based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission. The signing ceremony lasted 3 days and ended with the largest celebration in recorded history as beings who had been enemies learned to be friends. President Angela Davis had been re-elected twice and was now serving her final term as Earth's leader. She spent most of her time traveling between worlds, helping new governments learn how to protect their citizens while respecting the rights of their neighbors. The woman who had once faced the impossible task of defending humanity against the Zirathi Empire now helped former Zirathi worlds build democratic institutions. Korthax, the former Supreme General, had become simply Korth after his release from prison. He worked as a counselor helping other former Zirathi military personnel adapt to peacetime life. His transformation from ruthless conqueror to advocate for peace symbolized the broader change that humanity had brought to the galaxy. Korth often visited schools to talk to young people about the dangers of choosing fear over hope. Commander Zephyra had become the first Zirathi officer to join what was once the human fleet, and was now called the Galactic Protection Service. Her ship was named the XGS Redemption's Hope, and it patrolled the former border regions, protecting refugees and ensuring that no world would ever again face the kind of systematic destruction that the Zirathi Empire had once represented. Veltar lived in the house next to Jake's and helped tend the memorial gardens that covered much of Kepler 442b. The former intelligence chief had become a philosopher and teacher who wrote books about the importance of questioning authority and thinking for yourself. Children loved to listen to his stories about the old days when different species had been afraid of each other. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been appointed as the first Director of Galactic Peace Studies and spent her time developing new ways to resolve conflicts without violence. Her mirror protocol had become standard policy for the Protection Service and was taught in schools across the galaxy as an alternative to traditional military thinking. Danny Roberts commanded the protection fleet that defended the core worlds of the new Galactic Alliance. He had married Captain Mary Collins after the war ended, and they lived on Luna Base where they trained new officers in the principles that Jake had established. Their students learned that the strongest weapon was not a gun or a bomb, but the courage to do what was right, even when doing what was right might cost everything. The memorial ceremony held every year on the anniversary of the battle brought millions of visitors to Kepler 442b. They came to remember those who had died, but also to celebrate those who had chosen to live differently. Jake always spoke at the ceremony, but his words were simple and direct. He reminded people that peace was not something that happened by accident, but something that had to be chosen every day by every person. We did not win this war by being stronger or smarter or braver than our enemies. We won by being different. We won by choosing to protect rather than conquer. We won by choosing to heal rather than hurt. We won by choosing to hope rather than fear. And we can keep winning as long as we keep making those same choices. The children who played in Jake's garden spoke languages from across the galaxy and would grow up in a universe where cooperation was normal and war was something their grandparents remembered from history books. A young Cathara girl named Brightsong often asked Jake to tell her stories about the old days when different species had been afraid of each other. Uncle Jake, why did people used to fight each other instead of helping each other? Jake would smile and point to the memorial gardens. where flowers from 100 different worlds grew together in harmony. Because they had not learned yet that taking care of others is the same thing as taking care of yourself. Because they thought strength meant making others afraid instead of making others safe. But how did you teach them to be different? We showed them by example. We proved that humans would rather die protecting strangers than live by hurting them. And once we showed them what was possible, other people wanted to be that way too. The final test of the new galactic order came when long-range sensors detected signs of an aggressive empire in the Andromeda galaxy. The discovery triggered fears that another war might be coming, but Jake's response showed how much the galaxy had changed. Instead of building weapons and preparing for battle, the Protection Service sent exploration ships, carrying scientists and diplomats who wanted to make contact peacefully. Jake was chosen to lead the first mission to Andromeda, not because he was the best fighter, but because he was the best at turning enemies into friends. The expedition included representatives from every species in the Galactic Alliance and carried gifts of art and music and literature. Instead of guns and bombs, the message they broadcast as they approached the edge of Andromeda space was simple and direct. We are explorers from the Milky Way galaxy, and we come in peace. We do not want to conquer your worlds or steal your resources. We want to learn about your cultures and share our own. We want to offer friendship to anyone who wants to be our friend. The response from the Andromeda civilizations was cautious but curious. They had never encountered anyone who claimed to come in peace and meant it. The first diplomatic meetings were difficult because the Andromeda species had been fighting each other for thousands of years and did not understand how former enemies could work together, but Jake and his team had learned patience during the transformation of the Zirithi Empire. They spent months talking to different Andromeda governments and slowly building trust through small acts of kindness and cooperation. They shared medical knowledge that saved lives and agricultural techniques that increased food production. They offered protection to refugee populations and helped negotiate truces between warring factions. 1 year later, the first Andromeda delegation visited the Milky Way and saw for themselves how former enemies had learned to be friends. They toured the memorial gardens on Kepler 442b and listened to Jake tell the story of how one moment of sacrifice had changed the fate of 3 galaxies. The warrior who made humanity unstoppable was not the strongest or the smartest or the bravest person in the galaxy, Jake told the Andromeda visitors as they stood beside the monument to all who had died in the wars. He was just someone who decided that protecting others was more important than protecting himself. And once he made that choice, he discovered that he was not alone because there are good people in every species waiting for someone to stand up first. As the sun set over Kepler 442b, Jake walked home through gardens where children from across the universe played together while their parents worked to build a better future. The warrior who had made humanity unstoppable had done so not by perfecting the art of war, but by perfecting the art of hope. And as long as there were people willing to choose love over fear, the galaxy would remain unstoppable too.